Hi, this is Gwen Fisher with Environmental and Occupational Health 6639, Occupational Health Psychology. Hopefully during this course you'll learn more about improving health and well-being at work. And for this we're going to continue in Module 3 where we are talking about work motivation. In Module 3.2 we will discuss needs-based theories of work motivation and then later on tie that back to health and well-being at work. Here is the agenda for Module 3.2. First, I'll begin with a brief introduction to needs-based theories. Then I'll discuss the hierarchy of needs theory, ERG theory, two-factor theory, acquired needs theory, and finally provide a summary. Here are the learning objectives that I have for you for Module 3.2. By the end of this module, I hope that you will gain an understanding of work motivation, specifically as it relates to needs-based theories. Secondly, by the end of this module, you should be able to explain each of the 4 needs-based theories that we're going to discuss in this module. Briefly, let me just say that with regard to needs-based theories, they focus on the extent to which an individual's needs must be fulfilled and that fulfillment of those needs is what translates to motivation. In other words, as we seek to have our needs met, that is what motivates us to move forward and to do everything that we need to do at work. So for example, in the last module, we defined work motivation in terms of initiating and sustaining effort in a particular form, direction, intensity, and for a certain duration. And so needs-based theories more or less indicate that it's trying to get our needs met that is going to initiate that motivation for us at work. So previously we discussed self-determination theory. By way of just a reminder or a refresher, there were 3 specific psychological needs that were involved and became the basis of the later work in self-determination theory. Do you remember what those were? I really wish I could hear your mind at work or hear you in response. One of the downsides to an online course like this is that I don't have the opportunity to ask a lot of questions, which is really, quite honestly, the way I prefer to teach, is to ask a lot of questions instead of be talking at you the whole time. Nonetheless, to answer the question I just posed regarding self-determination theory, those needs included relatedness, competence, and autonomy. Hopefully that rings a bell. The other need-based theories that we're going to discuss next include hierarchy of needs, ERG theory, two-factor theory, and acquired needs theory. Now we'll talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Researchers have been thinking about motivation for a long time. This particular theory goes back to work by Abraham Maslow in the 1940s. At the time, he was a psychologist working at Brooklyn College in New York and introduced this theory in a classic book that he published called Motivation and Personality. He proposed that our needs are based on a hierarchy where we must first fulfill the lower level or more basic needs before moving up to the higher order needs, which is what he refers to as a fulfillment progression. This is a visual of what the hierarchy of needs looks like. At the bottom are physiological needs, then moving up to security needs, social needs, esteem needs, and self-actualization needs. Physiological needs are the most basic things that need to be met, followed by security, like having a roof over our head and so forth. To give you some specific examples of these needs based on his model, physiological needs are things like water, food, and air. Security needs include safe housing, steady employment, or healthcare benefits. Examples of social needs are having friendships, feeling accepted at work, or being involved in romantic attachments. Esteem needs refer to social recognition, competence, and accomplishment. Self-actualization needs include self-awareness, personal growth, and meaningful work. One of the tenets, again, of this particular model, this theory of needs, is that we can't progress on to the next level until the needs at the more basic level are met. In other words, we can't look for social recognition or a sense of accomplishment if we don't have safe housing or if we don't have our basic needs met in terms of water and food and so forth. If we're hungry, then it's harder to do things like strive for self-actualization. Do you buy this? Does it make sense to you? Furthermore, where do you think self-determination theory fits in here? Do any of the examples here jive with what we talked about in the previous module? Two things that come to mind here for me. One are social needs, such as what was discussed in the previous SDT, social determination theory, with regard to relatedness and connecting with other people. And then the other one is in esteem needs and specifically focusing on competence. Autonomy, however, is not listed here. And we could certainly discuss and debate whether that might fit in more with esteem needs or self-actualization. The next theory that I'd like to discuss is ERG theory, which stands for existence, relatedness, and growth. This was proposed by a researcher by the name of Clayton Alderfer, and it followed based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And rather than the 5 different levels that we just discussed with Maslow's hierarchy, Alderfer proposed that we have as individuals 3 core needs. The first one is existence. And existence more or less combines what Maslow had described as physiological and security needs. Relatedness refers to what Maslow described as social needs. And finally, growth includes Maslow's esteem and self-actualization needs. What I didn't mention previously but should have is that Maslow's hierarchy of needs model has not really received a great deal of empirical support. However, this ERG theory has received more support in the literature. In other words, there is empirical evidence that this holds a little bit more true with regard to how people's needs might be met. One of the criticisms of Maslow's hierarchy is the notion that it's not possible to move on to the higher level of needs if our more basic needs are not met. And there's some research evidence that shows that we might still be looking for connections with other people or a sense of accomplishment, even if we're struggling to find steady employment or if we don't have a safe roof over our head and so forth. And so that the needs don't necessarily need to be mutually exclusive as originally proposed. Here is another model that depicts ERG theory. So it shows motivation at the core, and that motivation then is driven by our striving for existence, relatedness, and growth needs. So unlike Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this theory posits that we can strive to have existence, relatedness, and growth at the same time, and that we can move between them in a nonlinear manner. In other words, we don't need that fulfillment progression as proposed by the pyramid that was in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And as I indicated before, there is some empirical support for ERG theory. The next needs-based theory was developed by Frederick Herzberg. Another term for two-factor theory is motivator hygiene theory. Hygiene factors are ones that don't motivate us when they're present, but they may reduce motivation if they're not met. On the other hand, motivator factors do motivate if they are present. So once again, let me try to clarify what I meant previously when I explained how this ties into motivation with regard to these two factors. So according to this two-factor theory, one way to think of it is more a model or a theory related to job satisfaction. According to this model, the hygiene factors are the ones that don't necessarily motivate us when they're present, but it's going to lower motivation if they're not present. So let's say, for example, that you get to work and you realize that somebody hadn't taken out the trash. Are you going to be really excited about having to do that? Probably not. However, it could really serve to demotivate you if you find out that that hasn't been done and that you need to take over and get that done. So according to this, we're more likely to strive for things like achievement, recognition, interesting work, and responsibility, but we'll be demotivated if all of a sudden we receive a cut in pay or we don't get our salary, or if we have poor relationships at work or really constraining or confining work policies and rules. The next and last theory we're going to discuss is what's called acquired needs theory. This was purported and developed by David McClelland, and it was a theory proposing that motivation is determined on the basis of whether our needs are met based on achievement, power, and affiliation. Need for achievement refers to wanting to excel or succeed. Maybe you're pursuing further education because you have your own need for achievement and wanting to move on. Need for power is wanting to influence others and make an impact. And finally, need for affiliation, which is wanting to have friendships, feel accepted, and engage with others. According to this theory, we each have a different constellation of these three needs, and it's believed that we have a dominant need that motivates us more than the other two needs. I'll give you a moment to think about this in terms of whether there's one of these needs that really seems to drive you. Is it an achievement orientation, power, or affiliation? Furthermore, I'm interested to know what you think about how these three needs tie back to what we discussed in some of the previous theories. Two things that come to mind for me is that we're seeing a consistent notion of relatedness, connection with other people, affiliation across lots of different theories, beginning with self-determination theory and moving on with the others that we talked about in this module. Need for affiliation and wanting to connect with people and have friendships, engaging with others, and so forth seems to be consistent. Secondly, the notion of competence or esteem needs and wanting to succeed seems consistent with this need for achievement. This is the first time, however, that I'm seeing anything regarding a need for power or wanting to have influence over other people. Do you agree? So compared to hierarchy of needs, ERG theory, and two-factor theory, the acquired needs theory has received the most consistent empirical support. To further summarize across these different needs-based theories, the gist of this is that we want to help individuals understand their own motivations. Hopefully, understanding these needs-based theories also help managers who can begin to identify what each employee needs, and by knowing what each employee needs, they can help motivate them at work. All of these needs-based theories tend to define motivation as a needs-based satisfaction. In other words, we need to satisfy these needs in order to be motivated. One of the issues with these needs-based theories is that they tend to refer to basic, stable characteristics and needs that we have, rather than dynamic processes that vary a great deal on a day-to-day basis. And that's one reason why we may not have as much empirical support for these theories relative to what we'll be discussing next with regard to process-based theories. In other words, although I just spent about 14 minutes talking to you about needs-based theories, the bottom line is that there's not a great deal of support for all of this. Hopefully you remember that it's that last one, in terms of the acquired needs theory, that has the most support. And we'll move on in the next module to talk about process theories of work motivation. Thank you.